The clasp clicked shut against the nape of a throat that was not hers, and from the doorway she counted, without meaning to, the 7 emeralds catching the candlelight in a row. 7. She had counted them many times in her life, in different rooms, in different lights, but never from a threshold she had not been invited to cross. Behind her, the long gallery breathed cold air through its old glass, and beyond the doorway, her husband's hands lingered a moment too long at the clasp, as if to be sure the necklace understood whose neck it now belonged to. The girl in the chair tilted her chin and smiled at her own reflection. The Duke smiled at the back of her head. Neither of them turned. They had not heard her, which was, she would think later, the truest sentence of the whole arrangement. They never did. She held the bundle of letters tighter against the lace of her bodice and felt the wax seals press into her ribs like small, patient teeth. There were 9 letters. She had counted those too. 7 stones at a stranger's throat, 9 seals against her own. She had a few seconds to decide whether to step into the room or to step away. She stepped away. The hallway took her in the way a forest takes a deer, soundless and complete, and old Mr. Halford the steward, who had been standing just behind her with his ledger held against his chest like a shield, lowered his eyes at exactly the angle a good servant lowers them when he has seen too much and intends to say nothing. He had been with the household 41 years. He had been with her family longer. "Your Grace," he said very low, as if speaking to an altar. She did not answer him at once. She was listening to the small sounds behind her. The rustle of silk as the girl turned her head to admire the fall of the pendant, a soft murmur she could not quite catch, but which she knew, by its shape, to be a compliment. The faint metallic ring of the empty jewel case being closed with one careless hand. Then, last, the laugh, not loud, not cruel, in any way she could have named in a courtroom. Only intimate, only the laugh of a man at ease in a room he had no right to be at ease in. Her mother's emeralds, she thought very calmly, are laughing back. She walked. She did not hurry. The west corridor was long, and at this hour the lamps were not yet lit, and the gilt frames along the wall held portraits of men who had all in their own centuries believed themselves the masters of this house. She passed her grandfather, she passed her father, she passed a small, dim painting of her great-aunt holding a folded fan and looking out of the canvas with an expression that had always seemed to her, even as a child, faintly amused. She did not look back at the closed door behind her, but she could feel it there, in the way one feels a window left open in winter. Mr. Halford kept 3 steps behind her, the ledger now tucked under his arm. He had not spoken again. He would not until she did. They came at last into the small study at the end of the corridor, the one that had been her mother's writing room, and was now, by long habit, hers. It smelled of old paper and beeswax, and the faint, dry green of the lavender she kept in a dish on the mantel. She set the letters on the desk in a neat stack. She set her gloves beside them. She sat down. She did not, for some moments, do anything at all. Mr. Halford stood with his hands folded, waiting. The clock on the mantel ticked through 11 seconds. She counted them, because counting was and had always been the way she steadied herself. At 12 she lifted her face. "How much does he owe us today, Halford?" The steward did not pretend to misunderstand. He opened the ledger to a page already marked by a thin ribbon of red silk, and he read the figure aloud in the flat, courteous voice he used for funerals and for sums. The figure was very large. She did not flinch. She had known it would be very large. She had been watching it grow for 3 years. The way a careful gardener watches a vine creep up a wall it was never meant to touch, noting each new tendril, deciding when exactly to cut. And the banks holding upon the southern estate? Entire, Your Grace, and upon the townhouse in Bellingham Square? Entire, and upon the stables at Wexford? Entire, Your Grace. As you instructed. She nodded. She had instructed. 3 years ago she had instructed very quietly, in a room not unlike this one, with a man very like Halford, and a different ledger and the particular small sting of signing her own name in full at the bottom of an instrument she had hoped never to use. She had bought the bank that summer, through 3 intermediaries and a cousin in the north who owed her a favor older than her marriage no one in society had known. Her husband had certainly not known. Her husband believed she had been at the spa at Hartlow taking the waters that summer. As a woman of delicate constitution might, she had not been at Hartlow. She had been in a paneled office in the city, signing her name, and afterward she had walked along the river for half an hour by herself and watched a barge unload sacks of grain, and felt for the first time in some years the curious calm of a person who has finally laid down a small, sharp tool on the workbench. She had been 17 when she married him. She was 31 now. In between, she had learned a great many things he had not known she was learning. "Has any payment been tendered this quarter?" she asked. "None, Your Grace." "Has any been promised?" "Promised, yes, twice, by letter. Neither honored." "From whom did the promises come?" Mr. Halford hesitated, and in the hesitation she heard the whole shape of the answer before he gave it. "From His Grace's secretary, Your Grace, under His Grace's seal." She looked down at the 9 letters on her desk. The topmost seal was a soft, deep crimson, and bore the small impression of a swan. The swan was her husband's device. Her own device, the one she used in private correspondence, was a sprig of rosemary. She had chosen it at 16 because rosemary, her mother had told her, was for remembrance. And she had been a girl who already understood the use of remembering. She drew the topmost letter from the stack and turned it over in her hands. The paper was good. The hand on the outside was not her husband's. It was, she thought, the same hand that had signed the 2 unhonored promises. "Your Grace, bring me Mr. Penrose tomorrow morning privately, through the side gate before 9. Yes, Your Grace, and send word to Mrs. Cleaver that I shall not be dining in the great room tonight." "A tray in here will do." "Yes, Your Grace." He bowed. He did not move. He was a man who knew when a conversation had a tail still attached to it. She let the silence hold. He did not fill it. At last she said very quietly, looking not at him but at the small dish of lavender on the mantel, "Was he aware that I had returned to the house?" "No, Your Grace." "He was informed that you would not arrive until Thursday." "I see." "Your Grace," said Mr. Halford, and stopped, and tried again. "Your Grace, the young woman in the east drawing-room is—" "I know who she is, Halford." "Yes, Your Grace." "Thank you." He bowed again, and this time he went, and the door closed behind him with the soft, exact click of a man who has closed a great many doors in his life on a great many things he would never speak of. She sat alone. She did not cry. She had not been a woman who cried easily for a long time, and she did not intend to start tonight when there was so much arithmetic still to do. She drew a fresh sheet of paper toward her, dipped her pen, and at the top of the page wrote in her clear, unhurried hand a single word, "Invendre." Below it she began to make a list. The list had 3 columns. In the first column, she wrote the names of things her husband believed to be his. In the second column, she wrote the true ownership, as recorded in deeds and instruments held in 3 separate strong-boxes, in 3 separate cities. In the third column, she wrote, beside each item, a small mark, a tick, a cross, or occasionally a careful question mark. She was halfway down the page when she paused, set the pen aside, and pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. It was not, she told herself, grief. It was only the body asking to be acknowledged. She acknowledged it. She picked up the pen again. Downstairs, very faintly, she heard the laugh once more. She did not look up. She wrote the next line. Outside, beyond the leaded window, The last light was going out of the long lawn in a slow, deliberate way, as if the day itself were considering its options. A blackbird sang twice in the yew hedge and then thought better of it. The first owl tested its voice somewhere over the lake. She wrote until the candles needed trimming, and then she trimmed them and wrote on. By the time Mrs. Cleaver came in with the tray, the page was full and the second page was begun, and the Duchess of Aldermere, whom polite society considered a quiet woman, a pleasant woman, a woman of no particular consequence beyond her birth, had drafted, in her clear and unhurried hand, the first 3 pages of the instrument. Without raising her voice, to take her own house back, she ate a little of the soup. She let the bread go cold. She slept, eventually, on the small couch under the window with the inventory folded once and tucked beneath her cheek. In the east wing, in a bed that had been her mother's, the necklace lay on a velvet cloth beside a stranger's hairpins, and the 7 emeralds, having been counted so many times that evening from so many angles, did what stones do in the dark, which is to wait. Morning came in pale and slow. Mr. Penrose came in through the side gate at 8:45, wearing a plain dark coat and carrying a leather case that had served him in graver rooms than this one. He was a small, dry man with a clerk's careful eyes and the absolute discretion of someone whose entire livelihood depended upon discretion. He had been her father's man of business. He was now hers. He had not known until she told him 3 years ago that he was hers. He had taken it well. He sat down across from her in the small study, refused tea, accepted water, opened his case, and looked at her over the rim of his spectacles in the way a doctor looks at a patient who has finally come to confess the symptom she has been hiding for months. Your Grace, Mr. Penrose, I should like, please, a clear accounting of every instrument by which my husband is presently obliged to the Aldermere and Western Counties Bank. I have it here, Your Grace. Of course you do. He did not smile, but his eyes did the small, dry thing they did. Instead of smiling, he laid the papers out between them in a fan, the way a careful card player will lay down a hand he has been holding for a long time. She read them slowly. She did not pretend in front of Mr. Penrose not to understand. He had been the one in the last winter of her father's life who had quietly taught her the difference between a covenant and a charge, between a mortgage and a mere note of hand, between a guarantee that bound a man's lands and a guarantee that bound only his reputation. Her father had wished her to know these things. Her father, who had had 3 sons and lost all of them in 3 different sorrows before his daughter was 16, had decided, very late, that she would have to be the keeper of the line, and he had taught her accordingly in evenings in his library, with a single lamp between them, and a glass of weak claret she was allowed to sip. She had loved him for it. She still did. She read the papers, and when she had finished, she set them down and folded her hands. He has charged the Southern estate twice, she said. Yes, Your Grace, once to the bank, once to a private lender in Calais. Yes, Your Grace. Does the private lender know the bank holds a prior charge? He does not, Your Grace. We have reason to believe he was told the estate was unencumbered, and the private lender is a Monsieur Vasseur, Your Grace, a gentleman of, shall we say, energetic methods. I see, she thought for a moment, looking past Mr. Penrose at the lavender. Has Monsieur Vasseur yet sought satisfaction? Not yet, Your Grace, but he has, I am told, recently arrived in London. He took rooms in Jermyn Street on Tuesday. Then we have perhaps a fortnight, perhaps less, Your Grace. She nodded. The nod was small. Inside her, the nod was very large. She'd been waiting, she realized, for someone like Monsieur Vasseur for some years, in the way one waits for a season. She had not known his name, but she had known his shape. He was the thing she would not have to do herself. He was the wind, and she had built her house, and she had only, now, to open the right windows and let him through the right rooms. Mr. Penrose, she said, I shall require 3 things of you. The first is that you draw up today a formal notice of demand under the bank's name upon every instrument upon which my husband stands obliged. The second is that the notice be served not at this house, but at his club by hand, at the hour he is most likely to be there with company. The third is that you have ready, by Thursday next, a clean conveyance returning the southern estate to the trust set up under my father's will, of which I am, as you know, the sole surviving beneficiary, and into which, by an oversight, my husband never troubled to correct. The southern estate remained eligible to be reabsorbed should the principal charge ever be called. Mr. Penrose looked at her for a long moment. Your Grace, he said, you have been waiting some time to say that sentence. It is a good sentence. Thank you, Mr. Penrose. Will you wish the notice to be served by myself in person or by a junior? By a junior, a well-mannered one. I do not wish his humiliation to be theatrical, only complete. Quite, Your Grace. He gathered the papers. He paused. He did not, as a rule, ask personal questions, and she did not, as a rule, invite them. But he had known her since she was a child in a pinafore who could already, at 9, add a column of figures faster than his clerks. May I ask, Your Grace, whether you have considered what you wish done with regard to the young woman? She had considered. She had considered, in fact, for most of the night, in the slow, honest hours, when one has no audience, and may therefore admit to oneself the smaller, less dignified parts of one's own thinking. She had considered turning the girl out into the lane with her boxes piled on the gravel, and she had considered that for about 4 minutes before setting it aside. She had considered confronting her at the breakfast table, over the silver, and she had considered that for rather less. In the end, she had returned to the thing she always returned to, which was that the girl was 22 years old and had been promised a great many things she was not going to receive, and that it served no purpose of hers to crush a creature her husband had already used. Mr. Penrose, she said, the young woman will require a quiet arrangement, a modest sum, settled upon her in her own name only, not to be touched by any future husband or guardian, a passage, if she wishes one, to her aunt in Lyon. The aunt exists. I have caused inquiries to be made. The necklace, of course, returns to me before sundown. Of course, Your Grace, she is not to know the sum comes from me. She is to be told it comes from a distant connection of her late father's. You will arrange the fiction. I shall, Your Grace. She is not, however, to remain in this house beyond tonight. No, Your Grace? Thank you. When he had gone, she stood at the window for a little while and watched the gardeners moving along the south border with their slow, considered tread. The morning had cleared. The yew hedge, which had endured many indignities in its long life, stood in its usual obliging shape. Declining to comment upon the household it sheltered, she found that she was faintly hungry. She rang for breakfast. The bell answered her almost at once because Mrs. Cleaver, like Mr. Halford, like every servant in that house older than 10, had been waiting since dawn for any signal at all from the small study at the end of the corridor, and had been arranging trays in advance the way other households arrange flowers. Mrs. Cleaver came in with toast and a soft-boiled egg and a pot of very strong tea and set them down with the small, grim satisfaction of a woman who had, at last, been given something useful to do. Your Grace, Mrs. Cleaver. His Grace is asking for you, is he? He has been told you returned last night. By whom? By me, Your Grace. Thank you, Mrs. Cleaver. I told him at breakfast. In front of the young person. A silence. How did he take it? He set down his cup, Your Grace, and the young person. She set down hers also, Your Grace, though rather more sharply. I see, he is presently in the morning room. He has asked that you attend him there at your earliest convenience. Tell him I shall come at 11. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Cleaver. Your Grace. Thank you, Mrs. Cleaver. who had not been thanked twice in one short conversation by a duchess for 16 years, lowered her eyes and went out with the tray balanced as if it carried a sleeping child. The Duchess of Aldermere ate her toast. She drank 2 cups of tea. She trimmed her hair at the temple with a small pair of scissors she kept in the drawer because a stray wisp had been bothering her, and because she did not wish, when she walked into the morning room, to be the kind of woman who put a hand to her hair under her husband's eye. At 11:15, she rose, smoothed the front of her dark green gown, considered briefly the question of jewels, and decided in favor of none. She wore, in the end, only her wedding ring, and at her throat the thin gold chain her mother had given her on her 10th birthday, with a small enameled rosemary sprig upon it, no bigger than a thumbnail. At 11 precisely, she went down. The morning room faced east. The light at that hour was clean and merciless, and her husband had chosen the chair at the window, which meant his own face was in shadow and hers, when she sat opposite, would not be. She noted this. She sat anyway. He had aged, she thought, more than she had been giving him credit for. She had not looked at him properly in some months. Now she did. His hair was still thick. His jaw was still a jaw any sculptor would have been pleased to be allowed near. But there was around the eyes the faint sag of a man who slept poorly and drank a little too much before he slept. And there was around the mouth the new habitual set of a man who had begun, somewhere in the last 2 years, to be afraid of his own letters. She had not noticed the fear before. She noticed it now. Eleanor. Edmund, you are home early. I am home on the day I said I would be home. You were misinformed. A small flicker, he recovered. He always recovered quickly. It was in many ways his best trick. There is a guest, he said, in the East Wing. Yes. I should have wished to prepare you. I am not in need of preparation. She is a relative of Captain Marston's. There has been a difficulty in her family. She is staying only a short while. Edmund? Yes. Do not please lie to me in this particular room. It was my mother's room. Choose another room for that, if you must. He was silent. The clock on the mantel measured 9 seconds. He looked for the first time in their conversation directly at her. He had blue eyes. She had once, at 17, believed those eyes to be the most truthful thing she had ever seen. She had been wrong, but it had not been a foolish belief. The eyes were, in their way, very persuasive even now. Eleanor, he said more quietly, what do you want? It was, she thought, the best question he had asked her in 9 years. She let the silence hold a moment. She did not fill it quickly. I want, she said, to know how much you owe. I beg your pardon. How much? In total, to every party as of this morning, he laughed. A short laugh without much breath in it. Eleanor, my dear, that is hardly... How much, Edmund? The laugh died. He looked at his hands. He had good hands. She had always thought so. She thought so still in the dispassionate way one might admire a horse one no longer intended to ride. A great deal, he said at last. Yes, more than I had quite intended. Yes. There have been losses. The Sutherland venture, the canal at Brixham, the horse? Which horse? Tamerlane. Ah, he was meant to win at Doncaster. He did not. She let him have a moment. She had not come to humiliate him in detail. She had merely come to be sure he understood that she knew. He understood. She could see him understanding in real time, the way one watches frost form on a pane. Eleanor, he said, if you are asking me, I am not asking you for anything, Edmund. I am telling you something. The bank to which you owe the bulk of your obligations will, this afternoon, serve notice of demand upon you at your club. The notice will be polite. It will be firm. It will give you 14 days, which is more than the law requires and less than your habits will find comfortable. At the end of 14 days, if the demand is not met, the bank will move upon the Southern estate, the townhouse, and the Wexford stables. In that order, you will not be able to prevent it. You will not be able to delay it. Monsieur Vasseur of Calais, who is presently in Jermyn Street and who believes he holds the only charge upon the Southern estate, will discover, at about the same moment, that he does not. I do not know what Monsieur Vasseur will do then. I have heard he is energetic. He had gone very white. Eleanor, yes. How do you know all of this? I own the bank, Edmund. He stared at her. He did not, at first, seem to take the sentence in. She watched it travel through him the way one watches a stone dropped down a deep well, listening for the splash that says the water has been reached. The splash came. His face changed. I bought it 3 years ago. Through my cousin in the north, I have been its principal shareholder since the autumn of the year you sold my mother's pearls to settle the Brixham loss. I bought it with money my father left me in a trust you did not know existed because he did not wish you to know it existed. I have been, since then, the holder of every instrument by which you have been borrowing against this house. I have approved every advance. I have signed every renewal. I have, on 3 occasions, personally instructed the bank to forbear when you were close to ruin, because I had not yet decided what I wished to do. I have decided now. He sat very still. Why now? Because of the necklace, Edmund. His mouth opened. He did not speak. The necklace was my mother's. You knew that. You knew that. And you put it on the throat of a girl in my mother's east wing bedroom, and you stood behind her, and you smiled at the back of her head, and you laughed, Edmund. You laughed in a way that told me you had decided I did not exist any longer in any room of this house that mattered to you. And I thought very calmly, standing in the corridor with the steward behind me and 9 of your letters in my hand. He is right. I do not exist any longer in any room of this house that matters to him. So I shall move into the rooms that matter to me, and I shall ask him, very politely, to leave them. He put his face in his hands. She watched. She did not enjoy watching, but she did not look away. She had married him in good faith. She had given him 9 years of good faith. She felt that she was owed the small dignity of seeing him understand in her presence what had been done and by whom. After a while he said into his palms, "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to sit at this desk this afternoon with Mr. Penrose and sign 3 documents. The first returns the Southern estate to my father's trust. The second assigns to me, in clear title, the townhouse in Bellingate Square in the Wexford stables in settlement of the principal of your debt to the bank. The third is a deed of separation. It is generous. It allows you 4,000 a year, paid quarterly, for the remainder of your natural life, from the rents of a small property in Northumberland, which I purchased in my own name in the 2nd year of our marriage, and which has done very well. You may live where you like upon that income. You may not live here. Eleanor, you may not live here, Edmund. The house was my father's. It is mine. It will, in due course, be—" She paused. She had not intended to say the next sentence. She said it. "It will, in due course, be our daughter's." He looked up. "I am with child, Edmund. I have been for some weeks. I had intended to tell you on Thursday over dinner, in the great room, in the way one is supposed to tell these things. I find I am telling you now, in this room, in this way, instead. I am sorry for that. I am not sorry for very much else this morning, but I am sorry for that." He stared at her. He had begun, she saw, to cry, in the silent, surprised way of men who have not cried in front of anyone for a long time, and have therefore forgotten how she did not go to him. She did not, however, look away. After a while, she said more gently than she had said anything yet, "You will not see her, Edmund, not while she is small. When she is older, if she wishes to know you, I shall not prevent her. I shall not prevent her from anything, but you will not undo in her childhood what you have undone in mine." He nodded. He could not seem to speak. She rose. "Mr. Penrose will be here at 3, she said. "Mrs. Cleaver will have arranged a light luncheon in the library. I should advise you to eat something. The afternoon will be long." She crossed to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. She did not turn. "The young woman," she said, "is being attended to. She will leave tonight, with a sum settled upon her in her own name and a passage, should she wish it, to her aunt in Lyon. She is not to be spoken to harshly by anyone in this house. Is that understood?" "Yes. Thank you." She opened the door. She went out. She walked down the corridor past her grandfather and her father and her amused great-aunt, and at her great-aunt she paused and looked up, and the painted eyes looked back at her with what she had always taken as a child for mild and approving mischief, and what she took today for something a little more like recognition. She smiled at her great-aunt. Her great-aunt, being paint, did not smile back, but did not, on the other hand, decline to. The girl in the East Wing was found. When Mrs. Cleaver went to her after luncheon, sitting on the edge of the bed with the emerald necklace already off and laid neatly upon the velvet cloth, and her small trunk already half packed. She was not, Mrs. Cleaver reported later, surprised. She had, it seemed, been a girl with eyes in her head. She had known, from the moment a footman did not bow to her at breakfast, that the wind had changed. She asked only one question, which was whether the Duchess would receive her before she left. The Duchess would. They met in the small study at 4 o'clock. The girl came in alone. She was, the Duchess saw, prettier than she had allowed herself to acknowledge from the doorway the night before, and younger, and tireder around the eyes. She wore a plain traveling dress. She had taken the pins out of her hair and put them back in more simply. She curtsied. The Duchess inclined her head. "Sit down, please." The girl sat. "Your name is Clémence Bouvier." "Yes, Your Grace." "Your father was a music master in Tours. Your mother died when you were 11. You have an aunt in Lyon, a Madame Raynaud, who keeps a small lodging house and has, on more than one occasion, written to you offering you a room. Is this correct?" "Yes, Your Grace. Why did you not go?" "I had been told, Your Grace, that I could do better." The Duchess looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "I expect you had been. By whom does not, at this hour, very much matter. I shall tell you only this. Mademoiselle Bouvier, you may do better still. You are 22. You read music. You speak 2 languages. There is in Lyon a school for the daughters of merchants, which is in need of an assistant mistress of French and pianoforte. The position has been offered to you by letter, by the directress, this morning. It is a respectable position. It is not a brilliant one. It will pay you enough to live on, and a little more, and you will have your own small room, with a window that looks toward the river. The sum settled upon you in your own name, which you will receive through Monsieur Lefebvre in Lyon, is sufficient, if you are careful, to keep you for some years, should you fall ill or should the position fail. You are not to touch the principal, except in such circumstances. You are to live otherwise upon your salary." The girl had begun very quietly to cry. "Your Grace, I do not require thanks, mademoiselle. I require only that you understand that this is the last conversation we shall have, and that you do not come back, not to this house, not to this country, not into this family by any door. Ever is that understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Thank you. The carriage leaves at 6. Mrs. Cleaver will see to your trunk. There will be a hamper. Goodbye, Mademoiselle Bouvier." "Goodbye, Your Grace." The girl rose, curtsied again, and went to the door. At the door she stopped. She did not turn fully. She said, to the door frame, "He told me they were his mother's, Your Grace. I know he did. I am sorry. Yes, I am sorry. I know. Go to Lyon, mademoiselle. Be useful. Be happy if you can. Goodbye." The door closed. The Duchess sat for a little while in the failing light and did not write anything. Then she rang for candles. The afternoon, as she had warned the Duke, was long. Mr. Penrose came at 3 and stayed until 8. The 3 documents were signed. The Duke's hand shook upon the first, was steadier upon the second, was, by the third, the hand of a man who had decided to be done with the business and to leave the room. He left the room. He left, in fact, the house that same night with 2 trunks and his valet, and an expression which Mrs. Cleaver, who watched from an upper window, described later to her sister as the face of a boy who had been sent down from school for something he had not quite believed he could be sent down for. He went to a hotel in town. He went after a fortnight, and after a brief and very loud interview in Jermyn Street, from which he emerged with a cut lip and an entirely new respect for Calais, to Northumberland, to the small property which produced his 4,000 a year, where he was received by a discreet housekeeper and a serviceable cook, and the garden which obliged him to take up walking. He took up walking. He took up in time the writing of long, unsent letters to his wife, in which he was by turns indignant, repentant, philosophical, and, at last, after some years, simply tired. He sent none of them. He lived a long time. He did not marry again. Monsieur Vasseur, finding his charge worthless and his temper exercised, departed for Calais 2 days after his interview at the club, having extracted by means the Duchess did not inquire into a sum from the Duke's personal effects, which she judged on balance to be a fair price for the lesson. Captain Marston, who had introduced the young woman in the first place, and who had been in his small way a beneficiary of the Duke's open hand, was found within the month to have been posted to a regiment in the West Indies, where he disliked the climate and wrote home complaining of it for several years. Mademoiselle Bouvier went to Lyon. She taught French and pianoforte at the school for the daughters of merchants. She married, 4 years later, a quiet bookseller named Auberton, who treated her with great gentleness and gave her 3 children and a small parlor with a window that looked toward the river. She kept, all her life, in a drawer in that parlor, a sealed letter she had not opened, addressed to her in a clear, unhurried hand, which she had been told by Monsieur Lefebvre she might open only if she ever found herself in need. She never did. She was buried with it. Mr. Halford remained at Aldermere until he was 81, at which point he announced with great formality that he wished to retire, and was given a cottage on the home farm, and a pension, and a small dog he had not asked for and did not in the end regret. Mrs. Cleaver outlived him by 9 years and ran the household for the Duchess's daughter as she had run it for the Duchess, with the same grim satisfaction and the same talent for arranging trays in advance. Penrose continued to come in by the side gate. He died at his desk, in his own office in the city, of a heart that had, all things considered, served him very well. With a half-written letter to the Duchess under his hand, she finished the letter herself. She had by then learned his handwriting. As for the Duchess, she did not in the end do anything spectacular with her life. She bore her daughter at midsummer in her mother's bed, with the windows open and the smell of cut hay coming in from the south field. She named the child Margaret, which had been her own mother's name, and she did not give the child any of the names of the men in the long gallery. She raised the child at Aldermere. She managed the estate. She kept the bank. She sat for a time on the boards of 2 charitable schools and 1 hospital, and she gave every year on the anniversary of her father's death a modest sum to a society for the relief of governesses fallen on hard times, which gift she did not sign. She did not remarry. She was offered in due course the opportunity, by more than one perfectly reasonable man, and she considered each offer with the seriousness it deserved, and she declined each in a letter which left the suitor with no wound and no false hope. She wore, in the evenings, when she was alone, the small enameled rosemary at her throat, The emeralds she kept in their case, in a drawer in her writing room, and brought out once a year on her mother's birthday, and laid upon the velvet, and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, always 7. They were the same 7, they had not been laughing. She came in the end to understand on the night she had stood in the doorway. They had been waiting, as stones do, to be taken home. They had been taken home, and so by midwinter of the year after, the great house at Aldermere settled into a quietness it had not known in some years. The corridors were lit on time, the accounts balanced, the yew hedge was clipped to the shape it preferred. In the small study at the end of the west corridor, a woman sat each evening at her father's desk, with her daughter asleep in a basket at her feet, and wrote in her clear, unhurried hand the small daily letters by which an estate is kept alive. And sometimes she paused and looked at the basket, and sometimes she did not. The fire in the grate made the small sounds fires make. The clock on the mantel kept its patient time. Outside, beyond the leaded window, the long lawn went down to the lake, and the lake, which had been there a great deal longer than the house, and intended to be there a great deal longer than its present mistress, declined as ever to comment. And so we come, you and I, to the end of this particular fire. You have sat with me through a long evening, and I am grateful for it, as I am always grateful for the company of a listener who does not need every feeling named to feel it. If you have ever stood in a doorway of your own life and counted very quietly the small bright things that were not where they were meant to be, if you have ever held a bundle of someone else's letters against your ribs and felt the seals press in like patient teeth, if you have ever decided in a hallway, with a steward behind you and your own breath very steady, that you would not raise your voice and you would not weep where you could be seen, and you would, instead, go quietly into the small room at the end of the corridor and pick up a pen and begin to make a list, then you already know the woman in this story, because you have been her in your own way, in your own house, on your own night, and I should like to know before we part, which moment stayed with you? Was it the click of the clasp at a stranger's throat? Was it the steward's lowered eyes? Was it the line about the rosemary at her own? Was it the girl at the door frame saying twice that she was sorry? Tell me, when you have a moment, which beat of this story you carried out of the room with you, because that, I have come to think, is how stories choose us, rather than the other way around. If you have liked sitting here, by this fire, with this voice, and would like to come back another night for another story, you are very welcome to pull up a chair beside this one, whenever the lamp is lit. There will always be another tale waiting, another quiet room at the end of another corridor, another small, bright thing being counted by someone who has not yet been seen. Until then, be gentle with yourself in your own doorways, count your own 7 stones kindly when you find them, and sleep, if you can, with something like rosemary at your throat. Good night, dear listener, good night.